and welcome to NETSOL's AI Labs podcast. My name is Erik Wagner. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at NETSOL Technologies. Joining me today, I have Dario Morelli, our VP of AI. I also have Faizaan Ghauri, our Chief Strategy Officer. Today, we're going to be talking about AI solutions and how NETSOL is helping to transform asset finance and digital retail using AI. Whether you're a finance leader or someone who's just interested in technology and want to learn more about how we are delivering solutions for our customers, let's dive in. All right. Well, first, let's start with you, Dario. Why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself? I know you joined NETSOL very recently. Can you tell us more about how you got into AI?
So I joined NETSOL about 2 months ago. Prior to that, I was the head of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence at Admiral Insurance for their international markets. And before that, I was in fintech for a company called TrueLayer for about 5 years. That's where I kicked off their data team from scratch and scaled it for about 12 people across data engineering, data analytics, and data science. And before that, I was in the music industry for a long time. I never really planned to be in AI. I studied something called music technologies, which was a weird mix of computer science, physics of sound, and communication applied to music, so nothing very marketable. But as my career evolved, I realized first through analytics, so Excel-based analytics, that there was something interesting in there for me. Then I learned SQL, then Python, all of that in my own time. And then later on, I signed up for a master's at Imperial College in business analytics and data science. So it wasn't really a straight line, but through all of that experience, I realized that it was really my calling. Just took me a while to get there.
That's awesome. Were there any early AI projects that you're most proud of or really inspired you to grow your career in that area? Yeah.
So early on, it was really focused on descriptive analytics. So simple SQL, simple queries, just to get the basics of what data can do. And then through some personal contacts, I realized there was so much more to it in terms of what traditional machine learning and now what you call AI could do. So a pivotal moment in my career was when I met through a acquaintance, somebody that showed me a very complex project in terms of financial forecasting. And I remember we went to this person's office and we were whiteboarding this problem. And it just opened up my mind to how just a different framing on a problem using machine learning could yield incredible results. And then I realized, okay, maybe I can do a little bit of that in my work as well. And so at that time, I was still in the music industry and I attempted a very, very rudimentary machine learning algorithm that was trying to predict the amount of streams that a specific set of songs or a specific artist were going to have on Spotify, or I don't remember what platform. It wasn't by any stretch the best algorithm, but it made me realize that certain problems could be tackled. And so that was an inspiration for some of the other things that then I did later on. So very rudimentary to begin with, but a step in the right direction.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Now, you joined NETSOL not that long ago. Was there anything specifically that you saw about NETSOL that drew you to the company?
I would say 2 things. The first one is I spoke to Ghauri, our president and chairman, and he articulated his vision for AI so clearly that I found it really inspiring. He was telling me, we built this company 30 years ago on a strong fit for a software-based product to an industry, auto financing, that really needed it. What's next? How do we evolve the company from within, and how do we sell this to our customers so that they can transform as well? And then I thought, okay, it's a very interesting proposition. You clearly articulated that to me. Maybe I can help. So that was the first seed. And the second one, when things got really interesting, I spoke to our global VP of sales, and he was just obsessed, relentless on monetization. So that made me realize, great, we're not just going to be in POC, proof of concept purgatory forever. We're not just going to build things for the sake of building them, but we want to make money out of this. We want to create efficiencies for ourselves and our customers. And if you want to have that, monetization has to be at the center. So you put those two things together, which is the vision as well as the execution with monetization at the core. I understood the company was serious.
Yeah.
And then I thought, okay, maybe bringing some of my skill set to this kind of problem, we can have something interesting to work with.
Sure.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was sitting on the other side of that process, and we like to use a model that Mark Zuckerberg talks about a lot when it comes to hiring. I think it was a similar model with you as well, Erik.
Sure.
Which is, if it were the other way around, would you work for this person? And clearly felt that about Erik and also yourself, Dario. And what we were seeing as we were going through this, it was a very, very, we ran a very wide process. We talked to lots of candidates. What we found was, of course, AI is a buzzword you hear about a lot. So what we found was a lot of people that had great experience. However, they didn't really have a true DNA and understanding or have actually worked in artificial intelligence. They were really, in some sense, wanting to learn on the job, right?
Yeah.
What got us so excited about Dario specifically was that in every conversation we had, we learned something new. It wasn't something that we would have learned without that we could learn on our own. It was really talking to Dario, and I remember specifically talking to you about understanding that there's traditional software engineering, but that data engineering needs to be elevated.
Yeah.
Knowledge engineering, data engineering needs to be elevated to that same sort of standard as your software engineering was. And I think that's a cultural change for NETSOL, but for the market, most of the market is pretty behind that change. So, every conversation was just additive and a good learning experience. And, now that you're on this side of the table, it's just continuing by day.
Cool. Building on that a bit, there's so many applications of AI in asset finance. Obviously, there could be so many different case studies and whatnot. But are there, Faizaan, from where you sit, how do you prioritize, which AI solutions and capabilities that we should be adding to, our product suite?
Yeah. So, one of the things we talk about a lot internally is you can agentify anything. Now, the question is, should you, right? Because there are cost parameters that come in. There are opportunity cost parameters that come in. And so you do need to have some pretty strong product management and prioritization that goes around. So I think generally the way we think about it is that these new systems, they're not just operational expense, operational efficiency creators anymore. Mm-hmm. Of course, you'll need less resource in places, but you have to look at the flip side of it is that, okay, if you need less resource in a certain business process or function, can you now take that same resource set and can you retrain them or have them focus on much more high value revenue generative opportunities for a business, right? So understanding both sides of things will help you make a much smarter product prioritization than just focusing on where we can create efficiencies. It should actually be a revenue generator.
Yeah. And Dario, maybe turning that same question to you, but what do you look for, like from more of maybe a technical perspective, in terms of selecting, a new feature that we want to agentify or add as a new AI capability?
I would say the technical component is obviously important, but I take a step back before talking about the technology and I focus on two things. Business focus on a tangible metric that is changing for the business and not for the technology. Yeah. And a strategic alignment of how that business metric can change a KPI that the company cares about.
Yep.
Which could be, for example, if I give an example, say that we have a target to increase revenues by X%. That would be our business goal. my question then would be, which leading indicator to that, for example, conversion, rate of qualifying leads, anything that then eventually contributes to revenue, how can I break that down into a sub-problem which is a good fit for AI? If I can do that, and I say that there is an incremental delta that AI is uniquely positioned to deliver, as opposed to, for example, traditional software development, then I think we've got a good fit. And then we come to the technology. So let's say that I find something, again, for the sake of argument, that can increase our marginal contribution to conversion, which then is going to lead to revenues. What technology should we use? Is it a good problem? Is it a classification problem? In that case, traditional machine learning will work. Is it something to do with text, where we need a lot of contextual knowledge? In that case, maybe LLMs will work. Is it something where we are trying to take an action on behalf of the users, using perhaps a human in the loop framework? In that case, agents might be more appropriate.
Sure.
Are we trying to build a dashboard? But in that case, it's not even AI. Simple descriptive analytics might be sufficient. So I take the view that if you have the business problem very well defined, if you can quantify the input and you can trace the strategic alignment, then choosing the technology is really a function of the level of maturity that you need and the complexity of the problem. But I don't start with technology first.
That's great. Can you elaborate a little bit more about your AI operating model, and like how do you foresee us driving adoption of AI, within, NETSOL?
You look at the operating model as the one of the cogs that needs to be smooth to support the success of the initiatives. And so there are different types of models. Some very heavily centralized, the traditional center of excellence, where you have everything under one roof. And that works for low maturity businesses that just want to get started in these kind of initiatives. And you have very high level maturity companies where they are completely federated. If this was a data exercise, it would be the equivalent of what data mesh was a few years ago. I'm trying to create a NETSOL, a hybrid approach, which some people call hub and spoke, where you have a small team at the core with certain capabilities, for example, machine learning, AI from a technological perspective, as well as product management, data governance. And this core team is really focused on a handful of things: driving innovation, training and upskilling of the company at large, and also enforcing best standards and practice.
Sure.
If you can do that centrally, then the spokes, which are really the domain experts embedded in different parts of the organization, for example, in sales, in operation, in finance, they're going to have the best of both worlds. Why? Because nobody knows the domain expertise in sales better than somebody that works in sales. But if they're also interested, if they understand a little bit of AI and they can use the center of excellence, the hybrid center of excellence, to get even more training on that, then we have the best of both worlds, because you have the domain expertise as well as the AI awareness. So the operating model, I really see it as an enabler to the success. And what is it that enables the hybrid model? The team.
Yeah.
And so if we spend a minute on this, I think it's really so important. I don't want to go too quick on that.
Sure.
You can get the right team, but in order to manage the right team, you have to have a very sound talent strategy. And I break it down into three. Given your budget, given your constraints, hire the best people that you can if you really want to be exceptional. So hiring. Then once you've hired the best people you can afford, you have to grow them. You need to keep them. You need to retain them. And to retain them typically they need to be very successful at what they're doing. They also have to be ambitious, and they have to be able to see a path of growth in their career. And that's something that we're doing as well internally with the development framework that I'm working on. And then sometimes, unfortunately, it might be that some people are not a good fit. And so as leaders, as managers, sometimes you have to have some of those tough conversations and just admit that probably this person who is extremely brilliant and talented, perhaps is not a good fit for the role. So if you nail the operating model, you nail the talent strategy, I think you've got a much stronger probability of succeeding.
Awesome. Faizaan, from a sales perspective, how do you articulate NETSOL's vision of becoming a leader in AI within the asset finance space?
Yeah, it starts with thought leadership, right? And I think it's telling. You just look at NetSol, look at the other players on the market, and see if there's a head of artificial intelligence there.
Sure.
That tells you right away how serious NetSol takes artificial intelligence, and I think that's resonating with customers. We have multiple customer engagements right now.
Sure.
That are being introduced. Dario is being introduced. What I'm finding, interestingly enough, is on the customer side, there tends to be a business leader focus on artificial intelligence. So the customers are getting very well educated. They're understanding things that are going on in the AI space, and they're actually now putting use cases in place. So I was talking to a large, very large portfolio customer just last week, and they are moving at a pace that even they are impressed on some of the AI use cases that they're putting into production. So we're trying to stay ahead, but we're noticing as the customer is getting much more and more sophisticated. So you need to show the talent is there. You need to demonstrate the business value back to what I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. It's not just operational efficiencies, it's about how does this actually grow the revenue line for the business. And then finally, you have to have a really strong process on how you're going to take these products from POC into deployment. And again, these are one of the areas that in the process of interviewing and talking to multiple candidates, really the way sort of Dario broke that down about being central, it's very easy to build a POC. It's a whole nother ballpark to actually be able to take that into production. So
for sure.
I think demonstrating that has been really important to our customers to show the value.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Dario, one question that I have, obviously as a leader in AI, you need to understand your users as well. And, is there anything that you want to point out around some of our techniques that, you've used either here or at past companies to understand, your users deeply?
I will give you an example from Admiral. Admiral is a very large auto insurer in the UK, millions of customers, billions in revenues, extremely healthy profit margins. And it's really perceived from the outside as one big monolith. But in reality, it's a constellation of smaller companies. Mm-hmm. My team worked very closely with one of these companies in this constellation called Vago, which offers short-term insurance for very young drivers. So imagine you have this big group with millions of customers. They don't want to fail potentially very big on a product on a scale of millions of customers. So they want to use a smaller company in that constellation to try and test small, iterate, see if something works, and then scale it up. And so we were tasked already, I think a year and a half ago, with building a chatbot which would facilitate the user journey, navigating the different options that were available on the website, and speak to specific segments of customers that was very different from the broad population of Admiral customers. These customers were very young, so already talking demographic, anybody between, I think, 19 and 25. After that, already, it was no longer our target demographic. And they wanted to interact in a way that is very different maybe from how millennials interact. Mm-hmm. They only wanted to chat to understand, for example, the characteristics of the product. They wouldn't want to pick up the phone. And so in that specific case, a chatbot was exactly the right solution for those type of users. And some people in my team did an excellent job, for example, nailing the tone of the chatbot, because you want it to sound natural as when you speak to ChatGPT, but with a very specific tone, which was cordial, friendly, but not too much, which would redirect you and stir the conversation back with guardrails if, for example, you asked an irrelevant or an inappropriate question. So all I'm trying to say is, if we had built the product without the user in mind, just for somebody generic, it would have fallen really, really flat. Instead, we thought, okay, which one is our core demographic? What do these people want? And at the user testing phase, when the rubber hits the road, that's where we really found, okay, it is working. And we found that the ratings were very, very positive. We had excellent adoption rates. The solution is still live, it works, and now it's switching into a phase of monetization. So what did I learn from that? That at NETSOL, I would like to follow a similar approach in that we shift from projects to products. What is the difference between the two? The products require a user by definition. You cannot have a product unless it's very clear to you who you're building for. And so I want that to be really a central component in the principles and values that we use to build AI solutions.
Yeah, so just quick aside, just thinking about the analogy you gave, I saw some research recently that the thumbs up emoji is considered the most negative, has the most negative connotation of all emojis for Gen Z. Yeah, it's kind of looked at as very passive aggressive. So, better to put a heart there than give a thumbs up usually.
Okay, noted.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you found that in your research, but it was pretty interesting.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, you bring up some interesting internal discussions that I would say NETSOL I've seen have for the last 15 years, if not since the inception, which is this project versus product. And I think, user experience, of course, really important, and user experience, especially now NETSOL's product set is B2C in some areas, Transcend retail. We are directly helping customers decide to make one of the biggest purchases of their lives, their vehicle, So to get that right is quite a bit of effort on UX to help with conversion. Now, I think the challenges, and we see this typically in enterprise software, is there is this natural sort of conflict between the decision maker, who oftentimes controls the budget and oftentimes will never actually use your product, So their incentives might look a little different
for sure
than the end user. Although we are seeing more harmony in that. We are seeing more of the decision makers start paying attention, which they should have done a long time ago, right? Start paying attention to user experience because their end customers are asking for it. But that is, I think, still an evolution that we're seeing on the customer side.
I completely agree. It's definitely a tension, and you have somebody, typically a CIO, that maybe is writing that check, and they want to be satisfied that the solution that they're buying is reliable, is compliant, is scalable. But ultimately, exactly like you said, they're not going to be using it day to day. So I hope that in the next evolution of AI-powered solutions, the user will be so front and center that the people actually using it will demand that if the product is superior, that they stick with it. And so hopefully this will put also the CIOs in a position to say, okay, the solution works, people have adopted it. I want to expand it. I want to keep using it. I want to get even more features. And that's a slightly different paradigm rather than being completely, let's say, hopeless that, okay, there's nothing better and then that's it. You want to be in the other position where you drive the conversation and the solution is so good that you want to stick with it.
Yeah, sure.
Speaking about, AI and solutions, obviously AI is extremely nascent in the asset finance world, like very, very new. But I'm curious, Dario, from your perspective, like in the next 3 to 5 years, like any predictions on how, this will impact the asset finance industry and kind of grow solutions?
I've seen what's been happening for the last few years in insurance and in fintech, open banking before that. And traditional machine learning, as we've seen it, is already being deployed at scale for the last 20 years. So nothing new there. Generative AI in the form of LLMs and agents, and more recently, small language models, is not yet exhausted, but I would say we are working on technology today, which was almost fundamentally designed and you can say that we've almost reached the outer limits of what the technology can do for the last couple of years. And so what's next? For me, what's next is some stuff that I'm reading about and it just blows my mind. What, for example, Ian LeCun the chief AI officers and Meta is working on at the minute is something called JEPA, which I don't remember exactly the acronym, but it uses the concept of joint embeddings, I think primarily applied to video, to learn in a completely different way than we can do today, directly from video. And the end goal, as he explains it, is to have a more grounded, conceptual understanding of the world as compared to what we have right now with LLMs. I'm going to go on a brief digression. What we do right now with LLMs is fundamentally predicting what the next token, think a word, is going to be given the previous one. This is what autoregressive means. That has no understanding of the world whatsoever. It's just using extremely sophisticated mathematics in deep neural networks to make that prediction with a sufficient level of confidence. Something that, for example, looking at this bottle, something that predicts that if I flip it like that, gravity is going to put it down. We don't have that. It doesn't exist. But research labs are working on that as we speak. And so you might wonder, how does that really affect us in auto finance? And I'll give you an example that I think might be fitting. Look at fraud. So we've had fraud detection systems for many, many years. Some of them very early on, very much rule-based. And then some more sophisticated ones may be machine learning-based. Some of the even more sophisticated recently might be using a combination of graph-based technologies and some generative AI. Do any of these systems detect the intent of the fraudster? Can they put themselves in the shoes of a fraudster that's got malicious intents and understand how they think and what are the kind of things they might be doing? We don't have any of that right now. If you had a system like that, then probably that would mean the step change from something like what we do today, for detection, from what we should really be doing, which is for prevention. But by definition, LLMs right now work on what they were trained on. In the space we call that in distribution predictions. Something that is outside of the distribution, that is not in the training data, it's very difficult for LLMs to work with correctly. And so the next level, if it makes a concrete jump from predicting the next token to predicting a higher level concept, which might be malicious behavior by whatever definition you've got, I think that's an interesting place to be.
Yeah, I mean, you were sharing with me some of this research earlier, and I coined it as intuitive intelligence. Is now you're actually developing, or these models are going to develop an intuition rather than being these really good word predictors that are trying to please their end user pretty well. And just one analogy, completely separate, but I remember one of my mentors who was the chairman and CEO of a large defense company, engineer by background. And he had a big decision to make to basically spin off, literally a $20 billion business from his main business. And he told me, and he does this for every single decision he makes, which is write down all the potential outcomes, weight them, run a decision tree, and that will give you some output. But ultimately, he's going to make a decision based on his gut. And in some sense, what you're describing to me starts making me think that these AI systems will start having intuition because they'll have semantic, contextual understanding of what they're actually spewing out there rather than kind of word predicting. So that really opens up like fraud detection, just a lot more insight and depth of understanding these models should have as we move forward.
That's great. It's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about regulations and ethics, and compliance is another kind of hot topic in the AI world. I know it's not the most sexy topic, but it's one that in AI you have to deal with. And Dario, I'm just kind of curious if you can add a little context around how do you kind of manage some of these challenges that anyone working in AI needs to face.
It's not optional. So when we talk about responsible AI, it's something that you have to do and that you should be doing purely because the trust that you build for your customers, knowing that the solution is able, for example, to detect bias, is explainable to the extent that some of these technologies can be explainable, that puts you in a good position when in front of regulators you have to explain these kind of things, but also you give reassurance to your customers that you know what you're doing. And so at the minute, obviously all eyes are on the EU AI Act, which is already come into force, and I think will be fully operational from August next year. NETSOL has got a global footprint, so we have customers in the EU, and as I said, it's not optional. We're going to have to comply with that, which means having very stringent criteria in terms of how we build our models, how we have certain tooling in order to extract the explainability out of these models to say, given this parameter, if we change it up or down, this is how it affects the final decision. That is extremely important, as well as factors that contribute to an outcome going in one direction or another. That is the fundamental level of explainability that we need. Equally though, I have to recognize that since we have got a global footprint, different parts of the world have different sensitivity to certain issues. Some things that are not acceptable in the EU might be acceptable in China, might be acceptable elsewhere. And so I think we need to take a very tailored, localized approach to make sure that we deliver solutions that are compliant locally. And there is no overarching regulation at a global stage. We know that in the US, it's still very dependent on the different states. So I would say it would be extremely cumbersome from a resource perspective if we were to take a blanket approach. So I'm still grappling with this. I'm not really an expert myself in AI when it comes to compliance and regulation, but I'm trying to do my best to find at least a high-level approach that works, and then invest also with dedicated talent on this front, where I think we need to switch gears and be a lot more proactive, purely because the regulation demands that we do.
And I think as you're saying, this localized approach, where basically we should just follow the law and framework that is in any region we're working in, because going beyond that, then we're taking an ethical stance, instead of reflecting back what the laws are. And I kind of think about what we saw happen with GDPR, right? You saw GDPR roll out in Europe. It was a big deal. A lot of companies had to convert overnight or over the course of a few weeks into being GDPR compliant. Yep. And then you saw follow-on regulations like California Consumer Protection Act, very similarly to GDPR, worked in the same model. So I think we'll see that again. The EU will set a standard. There will be some areas of the world that follow that. There'll be some areas of the world that maybe react against that, actually. And we should be pretty flexible just to stay compliant. Whatever jurisdiction we're in, we're compliant towards that jurisdiction.
I agree.
Great. Can you tell me a little bit about MCP, or Model Context Protocol?
That's been in the news a lot. And it's something that Anthropic developed, I think towards the end of last year. And all it is really is a standardized interface for a Gen AI engine to use tools in a standardized way that can make the integration of these tools more transparent, efficient, and therefore fast. Anthropic developed the initial protocol, and then I think OpenAI and all the other big players adopted it. I think this is really good news, because it means that the market is converging on solutions that improve reliability and improve standardization. That's exactly what we want. There are other protocols right now, like agent-to-agent communication, that are coming up. And I hope that we're going to see a similar level of adoption where we feel that we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. Just to end on this, I was quite impressed that already before I joined, in our AI infrastructure at NETSOL, we had provision for MCP to be a core component in that before it was in the news or anything like that. And this is what my team is using right now, where we're building agentic solution in some of our products as the standard de facto. And that's really good, because it means already from the beginning, we're following best practice. And so I'm very pleased that, this decision was made, and clearly we're doing whatever is best.
Dario, just a follow-up question, just to help the audience understand, before MCP was defined, what were the challenges when we talk about AI integration that MCP is helping solve?
The typical example is the one that involves booking a flight. Let's say you have an agent, and the agent, in order to carry out an action on your behalf, needs to call a certain number of tools. And he might need to call a search engine, and then a booking system, and then a payment system, and so on and so forth. As an AI developer, what you would have had to do in the case is specify in a bespoke way, local to you, how you would want your AI solution to query these different tools to achieve the outcome that you want. MCP is bringing standardization to that so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, but you can just use a solution out of the box. What that means, effectively, is that instead of writing boilerplate code that is going to take care of that for you, you can use already something that exists. And so that speeds up the experimentation and hopefully production cycles.
Yeah. It's almost like the equivalent of REST API for AI.
Exactly right. Yeah. So the concept is you're trying to bring in a standard that, if widely adopted, benefits the community as a whole.
Yeah. Great to see that even competitors are working together in terms of adopting these protocols and standards.
Yep, because they're smart enough that they recognize that their delta of value is not going to come from something like this. It's just a tool like any other that they would bring in and use, and then focus very precious engineering time, engineering brains on a more complex problem.
Sure.
Faizaan, maybe let's talk a little bit about sales and kind of the role that sales plays in developing like our product roadmap. Can you provide some context around that?
Sure. So, look, of course, sales is the ultimate input into this because we have a vision. We've been out there sharing it with the market, and sales is effectively the customer's ambassador to then feedback loop to us. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what keeps customers up at night, and what gets them excited. So I think really in terms of sales, Dario talked about, there are certain metrics that we are focused on as a business that then drive what AI use cases we do. And of course, for us, more than anything, sales conversion is our driving metric right now. We feel very strongly about a lot of areas of our business. We feel very strongly about our presence, our brand name, our knowledge and domain in the market. We think that AI can help us a lot with some of the conversion side. And why is that? Is because, again, against the competitors we are working against, we have the most advanced AI capability out there right now. We're the ones that are coming out very strongly. And it's not, of course, there are certain use cases where chatbots make sense.
Yeah.
But this is old news. Chatbots are, they were interesting in 2022, maybe earlier than that. And I'm not saying, there's certainly areas that we've launched chatbots in. But, when we talk about MCP, we're talking about AI actually acting and performing tasks that will save time and money for business. So we really do look at sort of the next phase, and we are trying to differentiate by really leaning in on AI, building this capability, building this team together, under Dario's leadership. So that's kind of how we think about the sales side of things.
Yeah, makes sense. And Dario, for you, asset finance is, I would say, a little bit of a conservative industry, right? You've got tons and tons of very confidential data. How do you kind of manage that balance between, really cutting edge technology, but then also, making sure that, what we're producing is being created responsibly and ethically? And so it kind of gets back to that earlier question as well around data.
There's a few things that you have to balance. One is, first of all, access to the data. It's very difficult to have a cutting edge AI solution that creates business impact unless you have access to the data. So that's extremely important. We take that very seriously. And so if we have access to data, but it might contain personal identifiable information or things that we shouldn't be using because it's unethical to use them, we're going to leave them out. I'll give you an example from prior experience. In the insurance industry in the UK, for example, you cannot price using gender as a variable. So I cannot give you a different price based on whether you're a male or a female.
Sure.
And I think that's the ethical thing to do. If you were to include that in a model, I can guarantee you the model will be more accurate because it would have more predicting power adding a new variable, but it's not the right thing to do. And I would like to follow exactly the same approach. So there are very clear ethical standards on the type of data that you should be using, how you should manipulate it, and things that you should and should not be doing. The ethical component here, I think, is central. So even if you have access to the data, I think part of best practice is to take steps to make sure there is nothing in there that could identify a specific person or anything that could directly introduce bias. So data, I would say, certainly at the crux of that. And then, as we said before, the business understanding of the problem. So asset finance, same as insurance, a little bit as payments, is not exactly the most innovative sector, but it's got very, very rich workflows from origination to contract management to debt collections, delinquency, and all of that. All of those problems are extremely complex, and NETSOL, I've realized these last couple of months, really masters the understanding of those processes like no one else. So another key component here, I think, is domain expertise. In the business, we have people that have been doing this for decades. They know the ins and outs of all of these conversations, and they are extremely important resources to be able then to create algorithms that start from a fundamental business understanding of the problem, not just coming up with a cookie cutter solution for an algorithm. So you put those things together, strong domain expertise, access to data, ethical considerations in the data that you use, and like we said earlier, good technology, great talent, you got a pretty good recipe.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
I can give an example of that where, it's one thing being technologists, but also having the business domain and bringing those together. That is the merger you want. And an example is, we recently won a digital retail contract on the OEM side, and there, it was in a space that we weren't even in the initial RFP when we went, and there were 20 other players there. However, we were then included in the RFP and eventually beat a bunch of the competitors, got to the final two, and then won. And it was ultimately some of the reasons why we were picked was there were a lot of technologists in that cohort. But what we had that a lot of the other technologists did not have is by understanding the financing flow of a digital retail process. Because of our DNA, because of our background, that was a huge edge for us to show that we could do more than simply the digital retail. We actually understood the most complex parts of that transaction.
Sure.
So you're right. This merger, being a technologist in isolation is not enough.
Yeah.
You need to have that domain knowledge to be able to move these forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Dario, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the new AI solutions and projects that NETSOL is working on? Can you provide some more context around those?
There's a couple that I'm really excited about. One is about credit decision engines. And it's a solution that blends traditional static data points together with AI solutions that use traditional LLMs in some cases, and in some other cases, AI agents. Something that I think is fundamentally right about the solution is that, talking about users, like you said before, it's got the final decision sitting with the expert. Who is the expert in this case? The credit analyst, the underwriter. They understand that thing, the risk, better than anyone else. What AI should be doing here really is augmenting the decisioning of the expert with new, more insightful data points that create a richer picture that allows the expert ultimately to make the final decision. And that is a plastic example of the human in the loop approach, where even if it was feasible, and in some cases it is, to automate all of that workflow, in certain cases, you deliberately decide not to, purely because you realize that an expert is best placed to make the final decision. And then another of the use cases that seems to be very popular with some of our customers and partners is using a mix of NLP and generative AI with traditional business intelligence to gather insights from some of the company's data points scattered around their data estates. There are solutions in the market, traditional BI, that can do that. But a lot of the conversations that we're having is from customers that are frustrated with the very high and cumbersome implementation costs of some of these solutions, and effectively finding themselves 1 or 2 years down the road without nothing to show for. So I'm really an advocate of iterative value, which is ultimately the spirit of Agile. Regardless of all the rituals or the things that come with Agile, fundamentally, the main tenet is iterative value, iterative delivery with the user in mind. And so if we can do this, like in this case with NLP applied to business analytics or with credit decision engines, I think we're on the right path.
Can I ask you just, I hear a common objection when we talk to the customer base on credit decision, on AI use cases. So 90% of, say, a transaction volume credit decision actually happens through plain vanilla business rules being met. So is this one of the areas, though, and this is the internal question that we've asked, like, does this actually need AI, and why would we need AI when so much of that business process just happens plain vanilla?
And that's a fair objection. I look at it this way. When I hear that something has been automated at 90%, 95%, to me it sounds like you're optimizing for speed. So you have low-level, simple decisions that you can fully automate away. Now, let's say that you've got a 5-10% left on the table. I see two problems with that. One is, if you overestimate the risk, you're leaving money on the table. You could be approving a loan and you don't, probably because you're being overly prudent. What if you had additional information that could have steered the direction of your decision differently? And the opposite is also true. So if you are too eager to go and approve in an origination context, you might say, yeah, okay, I've automated all of that away, but then you find yourself with a very bad book. And what does that mean? Really, from an operational level, you move the problem from an origination problem to something that can be much more problematic further down the line. So you are creating for yourself a delinquency rate problem, a debt collection problem. Do you really want that? So that 5 or 10% marginal, I think, could be very ripe for AI augmentation, not full automation or replacement, precisely to give you a more targeted, laser-focused approach, so that you evaluate the decision to say, am I leaving money on the table or am I being too greedy? That's where I think AI can really strike a better balance.
Yeah, if you would have caught the problem at the origination part of the journey, it's a lot less taxing, or at least gone in with full knowledge at the origination part of the journey. It's a lot less taxing than trying to resolve things at the delinquency part of the journey. So yeah, that makes sense. So I kind of want to switch gears here, if we're okay to it. This has been a great discussion so far, but it's helpful to understand, the people behind this company and the way they think, and ultimately every company is about, do you like the people you work with, and do you like their mindsets in some sense. So a question I like to ask, I'll go first. Question I like to ask just anyone I meet professionally, personally, is, and I want to caveat, there's really no wrong answers to this question, so it's open for everybody. But the prompt, so to speak, is what is the meaning of life in 3 words? So yeah, you can take a second to think about it. I know I'm kind of springing this on everybody here. I'll go first. If I had to break it down in 3 words, it's learning is a big one. for me. And, you can see AI systems. I think that's a big one for AI systems as well. But, I think that to give more context on that, the meaning of life is you have something to teach everyone you meet. You have something to learn from everyone you meet. So understanding the source of that, whether they're a coworker, a friend, a relative, a stranger even, that's a really important part of the meaning of life. Second is spirituality, just, spiritual journeys. My personal belief set is there's more to life than what is maybe in front of us. What is objectively in front of us, there's more to it, and sometimes you can find that in nature. And then family. Family is a big one for me, whether that's family of blood, but there's also family of choice. I actually, we're in Austin, and I saw a great sign just out here that said, "Plants are the family you choose." I'm actually building up I'm kind of furnishing a place right now, so I'm picking a family you choose as well. But of course, very important. NETSOL's DNA is a family-owned business, and that has been a huge strength. I think the bond and family and the ability to work together, and of course, we don't just think of it as a family of blood; it's a family of choice. So our employees, our coworkers, they become part of that family as well, very much for us. So that was my long context to my 3-word question. But yeah, I'd love to hear, Erik, what your thoughts are.
I was going to tell a joke. The live, laugh, love.
Beautiful.
No, I'm joking.
Cool. Yeah.
No, I think that's the hokey sign that you see all the memes about. Yeah. But I think learn was actually one that came to mind as well for me. I think
cool.
I like to think of myself as a student, always learning, like you said, from other people, from experiences, and always reading and trying to learn as much as possible. So I think that's important for me as well. It's always been something that's been instilled from like my family, my parents and grandparents, that like education's critical. I'd say a second one, adapt. I mean, change is inevitable, right? And if you want to survive, I think in the business world or any, like even personal world, right? Like you have to be ready to adapt yourself, and grow and change when needed. And then I think a final one, mentor, someone who helps others, and can be their trusted guide when needed. So I think those would be my 3.
Okay, I'm gonna say tell the truth. And I say that for a few reasons. So I think that's really the hallmark of somebody being really free.
Yeah.
If you are true to that and you can tell the truth, then it really means something. It means you are free. It's one of the values that we're trying to have in our family as well. So I have a family with a wife and two young children. It's really one of those things that we keep coming back, where we know that if we're not being truthful to each other, something is fundamentally wrong.
Beautiful.
And on the AI side of things, funny enough, we know for a fact that LLMs lie a lot, not just a bit.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering whether we're ever going to get perhaps to the next level of LLMs, or maybe different AI that is not LLM based, where these fundamental concept of truth maybe is at the core on some of those answers. I'd love to see that. But tough question.
Yeah, tough question, but very interesting. Tell the truth. I mean, that is, you see some of these AI systems that are, these AI models, their CEOs are saying, actually the mission of the company is to uncover the truth, but even that can be subjective sometimes as well. So yeah, that's a great one. Thanks for sharing. Both of you, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up, but any final thoughts? I'll start with you, Dario, if you want to add any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to add.
I think we covered a lot. I've joined at these pivotal moments where NETSOL is going through a whole transition. The industry wants to adapt. It's screaming for it. And I'm really glad to see that we are setting things in motion for that to happen, starting from the team, moving to the technology. putting our money where our mouth is, which I think is a lot of what some companies say they want to do, but then in reality they don't. So I'm just thankful because I feel so privileged to be here in this position right now, and I'm looking forward to getting stuff done.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Faizaan.
I've been doing a lot of research on longevity. I'm in my late 30s right now.
Oh boy.
And so and a lot of what you read is the health decisions I will make today are going to have a lot of impact on me when I'm in, hopefully in my 70s, 80s. Absolutely right now. And that same model applies so much to what we're seeing in asset finance today. I mean, these are usually on the auto captive side, these are products that are in place for 20, 30 years even.
Yep.
And you are seeing this sort of reformulation in the market today where there's a few folks that are sunsetting their product sets, and so people are coming to market. The auto captives are coming to market, and again, the decisions they make today are going to be with them when they're not at the company.
Yep.
20
years from now.
20 years from now. So it is an important decision, and I mean, it's hard. I think it's hard for anyone to really predict what the next 20 years looks like. So we're trying to stay current. We're trying to stay as current as even understanding. And, what Dario's describing, even in the next 1 or 2 years, things are going to change dramatically.
For sure.
So you got to have a growth mindset around that. And you've got to be ready that these are decisions you've got to live with for a long time, that your business has to live with for a long time. And we're here as partners to help that discussion. Whether we work with you or we don't, we're happy to offer our guidance.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to learn anything more about NETSOL and our AI labs, please go to netsoltech.com.